What's up, everybody? Ben Rasa and Matt Gajewski here for Awesemo, and we are back. The final day of the Elite Eight. There's two more games that we've got to break down, and then we will be set for the Final Four. Obviously, there are some Cinderellas still left. There's some Blue Bloods. We have everything in these two matchups. But before we dive into that, Matt, I do want to ask you, we talked about these games yesterday. Not the most entertaining games I've ever seen, but what were your takeaways from Houston and Villanova and then Duke and Arkansas?
They were close, at least, especially the Houston one. They made a little run at the end. It didn't quite matter, but I think ultimately the right teams won both games. Houston, they did not shoot up to their shot quality, but still at the end of the game, Villanova came away with that one with the better shots. It was basically a 50-50 in terms of shot quality. So a really good game on the floor, just in terms of back and forth, it being close. But man, both teams missed a lot of shots. And anytime you see a game go below the 100 total, that's concerning. Villanova moving forward might be a little bit of a lame duck with the injury situation that happened to them late in the game with Moore. So we'll have to see how that develops, but I don't think that's going to be positive for them moving forward. And then Duke just kind of playing good basketball at the right time of year. I mean, they have multiple NBA players, probably multiple lottery picks too. So I'm happy we don't have to talk about Eric Musselman anymore. Thankfully, that Arkansas team is finally out of the tournament.
So no doubt, mercifully there. Yeah, going back to Villanova for a second, Moore was on crutches. That seems very bad. That's a huge loss for a team that really only plays 6 guys. So that's going to be a serious factor as we talk in the future. But Houston was 1 for 20 from 3. It's a team I never got right the whole year. I thought Arizona was going to beat them. Edwards couldn't miss. Then he couldn't buy a bucket. It is what it is. I was glad to see Villanova win. They deserve to win, honestly. So I thought that was interesting. Duke kind of, to me, just imposed their will. The thing I was most surprised about, and then we can get to these games, JT Notte was a lot more passive than I thought he would be. He did foul out, but he didn't take nearly as many shots as I thought he would early. He started to open it up late when they were in desperation mode. But to me, that was surprising. You nailed Griffin. That was an easy pick on PrizePicks, which we'll be talking about throughout the show. That soared over his point total with his 3-point abilities. Any takeaways just from personnel, or is it kind of what you expected?
Personnel was pretty much what we expected. They're kind of playing musical chairs at point guard between Roach and Keels, and Roach played poorly, so I would be interested to see what Duke does moving forward at that position. But they're another team that plays a tight distribution of minutes, and you'll notice a common theme through most of the teams left, with the exception of one. They're playing their best guys. A lot of the good coaches are moving forward, and the poor coaches are being weeded out, so we don't have to deal with some of these teams like Arkansas and Michigan State anymore. And I'm really happy about that.
And Purdue.
That's another story.
That's a different show for a different time. Let's get into these games. They are a little earlier today, by the way. So if you're watching this, you better get on it. 2:20 tip. Miami and Kansas. Really surprising. We have Miami 6-point dog. There are 6.5s out there. I jumped on that. I really like Miami in this spot. I think it's going to be a competitive game, but if you're looking to bet it, find that 6.5. It is available, 146.5 total. So this is probably the better of the two games from a fantasy standpoint. Let's start with the Canes. McGusty, Moore, Wong, these guards, they had a little more turnover issues against Iowa State, but in the second half, still very surgical. We know what they're going to do. You mentioned the tight rotation. Do we target these guards? We'll talk about Wardenberg in the front court, but how do you break down Miami?
The guards are definitely good targets. You have to start with McGusty. He's their leader at this point. I mean, they're all veterans, so it's a good backcourt for sure. And it's kind of a decent matchup just in terms of betting against Kansas. Kansas is another team that doesn't play with a ton of size. And Miami has shown the ability to take advantage of some of the less athletic bigs. And I think they can definitely do that when Big Dave McCormick is on the floor. We saw them bring Walker Kessler out in space and make him play out of his element instead of, a lot of teams drive on Walker Kessler and he just gets these easy blocks. Miami did not do that. And I don't expect them to do that when Big Dave is on the court here. And conversely, we know Miami is a team that doesn't turn the ball over a lot. So a lot of the advantages that Kansas might have, Miami just kind of naturally mitigates with veteran guard play. For DFS purposes, McGusty is going to play every single minute. He's actually active in almost every statistical category. He has a 19.5% rebound rate. And that kind of comes down to Miami is not a great rebounding team. They're outside the top 300, but somebody has to grab boards for these teams. And when you play small ball, McGusty actually ends up with a better rebounding rate than a lot of people would think. He's very active with the assist rate too. So even though he is the most expensive player on this team on DraftKings, he still comes out with the best price adjusted projection. And Miami has a good team total. It's 70.75. That's just narrowly behind North Carolina. So Miami is third, but it's very close here. Once we start talking about St. Peter's later, you'll see the gap there is wide. The top three teams are kind of interchangeable in terms of implied team total. Behind him, you're going to have Wong and Charlie Moore. Charlie Moore, he's basically just a peripheral player. He lives through that assist rate. He's overpriced when you can just pay 400 to get up to McGusty. But because of the tight rotation, he'll be a great GPP play. Wong, he's kind of active everywhere. He is a 24.5% shot rate, 15% rebound rate, and 13% assist rate. So the floor is pretty good with Wong. I would rather get down to Wong or up to McGusty if you're talking about the guards for Miami.
Where does that leave a guy like Jordan Miller, who's kind of a combo, 6 for 6 against Iowa State, contributed a ton in the peripherals, blocks, steals, chipped in everywhere. He is just under 6K. Is he playable? Is he an addition? Is he a standalone? What do you do with him?
He's very attractive in terms of price. Having a hard time deciding between him and Sam Wardenberg right now. And it depends on how you rate play over the course of the year versus recent play, because recently Wardenberg has been fantastic, and Wardenberg is actually really their only big, the only big they'll play. They just play 5 guys and that's it. And luckily they don't deal with many fouls, so we haven't really had to see them test their bench. But Wardenberg, he's a guy that is live for a double-double at any point. He has nearly an 18% rebound rate. He actually has a higher assist rate than you might think too. It's up at 19% over the last 3 games. Both of them will play every single minute. I typically will fall back on the season-long sample compared to recent play. So Miller would be the guy I would try to get to on DraftKings. We could talk about FanDuel for a second too, because most of the Miami players over there are all near 7K in price, 7, 8K. And then Sam Wardenberg's just randomly at 5.1. So on FanDuel, Wardenberg is very clearly the play. On DraftKings, it's much closer, and I prefer Miller.
And I assume if you're playing cash, he's got to be in there on FanDuel.
Yes, on FanDuel for sure.
Okay.
FanDuel is actually normally, because of the way they structure their positions, like DraftKings sometimes gives people dual eligibility. FanDuel usually doesn't. That makes forward pretty weak over there. But today it's actually pretty strong with the Baycott's Mannix. So if you can find a different construction, I don't think Wardenberg is necessary. But for cash, he definitely saves you enough salary, and you probably want to target him there.
Last question on Miami, and I do want to ask you some PrizePicks questions. We're going to get to them in full in a minute, but do you think it's possible, or even remotely, possible to play Anthony Walker and hope that Miami deals with fouls for the first time, or is that just a way too aggressive idea?
Only in the large field tournaments. And I think it would probably depend on the position again. Walker would benefit from like a Wardenberg foul, but if it's Charlie Moore, McGusty, one of the players in the backcourt, they probably would use Wooga Poplar just because he's more of the traditional guard. So it's not like they're going to play one guy specifically off the bench. And, in the backcourt, it could be Bensley Joseph too. I don't think we know clearly who would benefit.
Looking at PrizePicks for this Miami team, and again, if you're getting over there, I'll talk about some of the deals we have. But of course, the data that you've put on the site, the tools, it is invaluable. We hit a couple easy ones yesterday. Charlie Moore's assist prop at 5.5. You've got multiple rebounding guys, 4.5, 5, 5.5 for Wong, McGusty, and Miller, respectively. You mentioned these guys contribute in a lot of peripherals. Do you think Charlie Moore as a distributor is somewhere to target, or are you looking to the rebounding props of Miami? Anything stand out?
I think a lot of the Miami guys are under projected. One that I actually like towards the under is Moore's assist. Even at 36.5 minutes, which is where we have him today, he's at 4.7 assists. So that's pretty decent towards the under. The game environment as a whole is solid, but Charlie Moore, he's obviously their main player in the periphery when it comes to assists. But even with that super high assist rate, you're reaching a little bit on his prop. I think some of the points could make a little more sense if you're trying to go over. And McGusty is a player that's still under projected. And we're seeing that a lot with the studs on these slates. I think PrizePicks and some of the providers of props sometimes lose sight of these teams narrowing their rotations during the tournaments. These games mean more than any other games they played all season. So you can sometimes gain a little bit of an edge towards the over on studs. But I'm more looking in the cheaper range with players like AJ Griffin yesterday, where there's a role change. So To me, I'm probably not focusing on any of these Miami props unless you're playing just a bunch of them.
On the other side, we've got Kansas, the lone 1 seed remaining. They haven't been overly impressive, but at the same time, they're moving on. They haven't played really anyone, in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of Providence, even though I thought Providence was pretty unlucky, particularly in that first half. But let's talk about Abaji. Let's talk about Braun Wilson. Remy Martin has been a lightning rod of discussion on these shows all week. So what do you see with Kansas? Are you paying up? Are you going balanced? Are there values to be had?
Kansas kind of provides it all for DFS. You have the studs at the top, like Baji and Braun. They don't project as well as some of the other studs, like McGusty projects a little better, and from a price adjusted standpoint. And then we'll talk about North Carolina later. They project way better than some of these guys. And it's because Agbaji and Brown, they play a specific role. Agbaji lives through that shot rate. It's up at 23% on the year. His peripherals are solid, but they leave a lot to be desired when you can have cheaper players that have better rates in the North Carolina game. So Agbaji, I think for GPPs is fantastic. You're accessing a ceiling. The team total is fantastic, but he doesn't project quite as well. So it's kind of that perfect storm for GPPs. Brown is the same thing. He just doesn't have any specific rate that stands out above the rest. He's literally between 17 and 17.5% shot rate, rebound rate, and assist rate. Gives you a phenomenal floor, but the ceiling is a little questionable outside of an outlier performance. Jalen Wilson's actually, I think, the best price adjusted play on the team on DraftKings specifically. He's very expensive on FanDuel, so it's not the case over there. He's playing every single minute. He is the highest double-double equity on the team with that 25.5% rebound rate. And I think a lot of people will still think he's playing that limited role he saw earlier in the year. I mean, this is a guy that's kind of worked his way into 30-plus minutes a game. He hasn't always received that. And plus, the matchup against Miami is phenomenal. We're talking about a team that doesn't play with any size and is outside the top 300 in rebounding. So Jalen Wilson really stands out.
Yeah, Jalen Wilson's rebounding prop is at 7.5 on PrizePicks. Is that something that you may, because you know who's been rebounding a little bit? I want to actually ask you, it's not on PrizePicks, but just in general. Remy Martin is grabbing a lot of boards. Is that just an outlier? He had 7 against Creighton and Providence. Is that something we could see, or is that just, variance?
I personally think it's variance. It's been a hot topic of discussion on the internet, we'll say. Remy Martin, I don't have the specific stat in front of me, but this guy's a veteran. He's played I don't know how many games in his career.
100 plus.
Yeah, I don't think he's ever had one above 5 rebounds until then. And Remy Martin's a point guard. He's not a rebounder. So that is definitely an outlier performance. Wilson, as far as PrizePicks, we have him at 8.8. That's a fantastic value there. And I actually wanted to talk about this Kansas team in PrizePicks a little bit because both players in their front court are kind of playing diverging roles. Jalen Wilson is playing an ascending role, so a lot of his props are under projected. That rebound one really stands out when we have him at nearly 9 rebounds, and then you can find him on PrizePicks at 7.5. But Big Dave McCormick, I think, is a guy you can look towards the under too on his props. And the one I like with him is points. I see him at 9.5. We have Big Dave McCormick right around 8, and he's a player, 8.5, just to be specific. But he's a player that has kind of played a tenuous role all season long. He kind of is parked in the mid-20s. He deals with a lot of foul trouble, and that's an issue. Mitch Lightfoot was injured in the first 2 rounds of the tournament. He ended up playing through it, and that kind of allowed Big Dave to access a ceiling we hadn't seen in a little while. But then in the Sweet 16 matchup, Lightfoot came back and played 16 minutes, which I think bodes a little bit well for his health moving forward. He just appears healthier and he'll play more minutes, which comes directly out of Big Dave McCormick. It doesn't come out of Jalen Wilson. And then you also have the matchup. I think if Miami kind of plays this Kansas team like they played Auburn and tries to get Big Dave in space, they're probably just going to take him off the floor. He's not a guy that moves as well as Jalen Wilson out there. So when he's matched up on the perimeter against a guard, if they're trying to switch players, that's going to be a huge mismatch for Miami in Miami's favor. So I don't know that Big Dave McCormick has the minute consistency we're looking for either. He's a player I'm looking to short. And conversely, I think Jalen Wilson benefits from that, which you can look towards the over on his.
Yeah, you mentioned that, a guy like Warrenberg, he took 7 threes against Iowa State. He can pull them out. There's no doubt. Do you think you can go to Lightfoot specifically, or does he just make McCormick's minutes that tenuous?
So we're playing 2 game slates now. If you're playing the larger tournaments today, you have to consider these guys. And we saw it with Jawan Roberts yesterday. for whatever reason, something random happens at the game, fouls, an injury, whatever it may be, and one of these 3K, 3.5K players gets on the floor and scores even like 20 points at low ownership, that could be the decision point that gets you a tournament win. And we saw that yesterday even. So this is another good example. I don't think Mitch Lightfoot is going to be the player that has the Juwan Roberts score, but he's a player that will receive 12 to 15 minutes with upside for more if something like fouls occur in Big Dave's game. So there is a little bit of upside. I think he should be at least in play for your larger field tournaments there. We didn't touch about Remy too much. I still think we haven't seen the full ceiling for Remy. The problem is he's now playing 27 to 30 minutes at an elevated price. We loved him at 4.5K, even 5.8K. I think he was in the Sweet 16. That was fine, but he's now up at 6.3, and he kind of needs the 30 minutes to get there. I will say I do think that is coming. Even against Providence, the margin of victory was just 5 points, but the game really wasn't in Providence grasp. But that was kind of a lead that was cut down throughout the game, and Providence could never quite get back. But to that point, Kansas was also never really tested. So I don't think they needed to unleash Remy for 32 minutes, which is something I think we could see here if Miami can keep it close.
Yeah, I mean, some of the Duke players, just their price incrementally has adjusted. At least he's got some serious jumps. Like, it is not the same thing we're talking about from a couple games ago. Last question. Are you joining me on the one team in this wacky tournament? Miami's been great to me, except for Auburn, but that's regardless. Are you betting Miami? You betting Kansas? You betting a total? Anything in this game from a betting standpoint?
I took Miami at 6.5. It's now down to 5.5 in a lot of spots. I wouldn't touch it there. I just took it because the number was going to move. Like, this opened at +8. Unfortunately, wasn't available to me at that number. But
yeah, I missed that too.
Yeah, you knew the movement was coming, so it was one I just grabbed immediately when it opened.
And I will say, if you do go to oddchopper.com and you want to shop the odds, there is one 6.5 out there on a big time site. There's no reason not to go grab that. I grabbed it right before the show. It is out there. In fact, and if you want even more betting content, of course, OddsChecker YouTube and our premium Discord, you can get all those picks from me, Matt, Alex, Steve, the whole team, whether it's NBA, college basketball. I gave a lacrosse pick. I'm doing all sorts of jangles in there. You can use the link in the description of the video. It's a great time. We'd love to have you in there, but let's move on. And I do want to touch again on our sponsor of this show, and it is PrizePicks. They've stuck with us the whole tournament. Done a great job. If you haven't been over there, they're daily prop-based contests. No sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You're picking 5-player lineups. You can net up to 10x your entry fee. And you are doing what we have been talking about. Over-under projections, whether it's points, rebounds, assists, fantasy points, all different categories. It's a totally different format than you may be used to. A lot of money to be made. You can download in the App Store, on Google Play, or just play on PrizePicks.com. And when you sign up, use that promo code Awesemo for a $100 first match deposit bonus. You're going to get 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum when you sign up using the link in the description of the video. Look at that right on the screen. Best thing about PrizePicks, I say it every time, Matt, is your projections quickly and easily identify these edges. We had Daniels yesterday. We had Note, who did not get there, but Griffin soared over. You already mentioned Jalen Wilson. Is there anything else that really stands out from this game? We're going to talk PrizePicks in the second game, but anything from Kansas that you want to mention before we move on?
I don't think so. I think Big Dave unders, Jalen Wilson overs, which we already hit. Those are my favorite.
All right, here we go. Again, it's not National Peacock Day anymore, so they're on their own. St. Peter's is still in this tournament. They play North Carolina, the matchup I think we all expected. I mean, I don't understand. They beat Purdue. I'm chalking that up to Purdue's bad coaching, but this team also, they made their free throws when they needed to. They played very well. Shot quality is suspect. I'm not going to lie. They are an 8-point dog. Once again, 137.5 point total. All right, let's start with this team, and I'm sure we're going to ruffle some feathers. You see what I did there? But I don't think that this team is live to do a ton. Now, I'm not saying they can't win the game, but the metrics are not in their favor. They're so strong defensively, but from an offensive standpoint, even though it's a good pace-up spot, what are you doing with St. Peter's here on this there's only 4 teams and they project seemingly the worst?
Yeah, it's not even close. We talked about Miami being at least in that same tier as far as team total goes when we're looking at the 4 teams, and Miami's the underdog. When we look at this game, St. Peter's 64-point implied team total is an 8.5 point underdog. It's just a drastically different story. This game is projected for 10 less points as a whole. I don't know what's going to happen with the pace. North Carolina really pushes opponents, but we've also seen them slowed at times. Even in their last 4 games, Virginia Tech slowed them. They played at a pace below 68 possessions. In their most recent game against UCLA, they did the same thing. So if I were betting something in the game, it would be the under. I'm not going to take anything, I don't think. But stylistically, St. Peter's, they are a matchup. North Carolina is a matchup nightmare for them again. If we look at field goal percentage, St. Peter's is 230th in the country. Shot quality, St. Peter's is 251st. And the only other team in the Sweet 16 that was below the top 50 was Iowa State. So, I mean, this team is drastically overperformed. We saw 3 straight upsets, and not just that, but 3 straight shot quality upsets. So that's grading the shots taken on the floor. St. Peter's already should have lost 3 straight games, but they make it to this point. And then we haven't even gotten into the biggest advantage for North Carolina, which is their height and size inside. St. Peter's has struggled against that all year. They're 251st in height. North Carolina's 24th. Rebounding, North Carolina's 8th. St. Peter's is outside the top 100. And finally, we have a good coach here. North Carolina has a solid coach. He plays all their studs as many minutes as they can handle because the drop off to their bench is significant. It's not a Trevion Williams, Zach Edey situation where Painter can't figure out which players to get on the floor. We know Davis is going to play the best dudes the entire game. So if I were betting it, it would be the under and favoring North Carolina. But that is something I still think I'm going to stay away from. Did you bet the game?
So I think that it would definitely be on the North Carolina side. I'm going to have something on it. I don't know if I'm going to take a total. I don't know if I may look to take North Carolina as a parlay piece and something. I don't see them losing often. I'm not going to pay I've seen upwards of -400. That's way too much. But if you get in the mid 3s and you want to attach it to something, I don't think it's that crazy. I think North Carolina, I've said this multiple times and I've been proven wrong, but I think that their personnel is almost uniquely suited to cause major problems for a team like St. Peter's. And I want to ask you specifically about Indefo, who fouled out. He was not able to stay on the floor against Purdue. Does that render him as just basically a large field tournament play only, given that Baycott and co could cause these problems? Or do you think that he's a nice bounce back candidate?
There are 150 tournaments available. We don't always have that, especially in the regular season, but during the postseason, they have given us those. I would play him in 150 builds, and he would probably be in around 10 to 15% of my lineups. I'm not playing that many lineups, and I'm just straight up Xing him out. He's more expensive than players like Caleb Love. He doesn't play consistent minutes, and he's a huge foul risk. This St. Peter's team is top 20 in the country in foul rate, which is never a good stat. They play a 10-man rotation, and they have a horrific implied team total, not to mention Indefo is going to be trying to bang in the paint a little bit. Just a terrible matchup for him. His price is laughable.
I don't really get it. Can you short him on PrizePicks potentially?
I like a lot of the unders for St. Peter's. They run such a wide rotation. They have such a poor team total and such a bad matchup here that most of them are over projected. Indefo in particularly, I think the points is something you can look towards the under.
I would agree. The rest of the Peacocks are all in pretty appealing price points. Does that render them playable? I mean, everyone else is sub 5K.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the last time we saw them on the slate in the Sweet 16. They're the only true values, like consistent values. There's players like Lightfoot, but they're not consistent. We can at least guarantee that Doug Eater, Daryl Banks, Hassan Drame, Matthew Lee, these guys are going to be on the floor 20 to 28 minutes. Now, none of them are very good. None of them have good projections. Their rates are spread, so it gives you like this built-in floor, but none of them have an elite ceiling, I'll say. But just to break them down a little bit, Eater, I think, is going to go significantly over-owned. He hasn't played more than 25 minutes in 3 straight games, and that's not because of foul trouble. He's just a very inconsistent player. But he's the face of the public. He's the guy that has the Buffalo Wild Wings sponsorship. People think he looks funny because of his mustache, so he's all over the internet and people know who he is. He probably gets played a little more than Daryl Banks, who is, I think, a lot better. Daryl Banks is shot reliant, which gives you sort of a ceiling at his price. I mean, I'm not going to say he's going to score 30 fantasy points or anything like that, but he does have the highest shot rate on the team. Usage rate is good for him. He just doesn't do anything else. So if he doesn't hit the shots, you might be left with a single-digit score. Don't love that. I think my favorite play is Matthew Lee. He's the cheapest one of this little bunch here, receiving 20 to 30 minutes. and he's their point guard. So he has decent peripheral upside that also gives you a built-in floor. And he's the cheapest, so he doesn't need to score as much as maybe a Daryl Banks, who's about $1,000 more expensive on DraftKings. Rounding out this group, you have Hassan Drame. He plays in the front court, another guy with tons of foul risk. All he does is rebound. And as you can probably see, all these players play a specific role, so none of them have consistency anywhere, which is a huge issue. If I'm playing them, I'm just trying to save the most money and play Lee. I do think there are a couple players that come off the bench that are somewhat viable. In this like 10 to 20 minute range, you have Clarence Rupert. He actually got 22 minutes in their last game, played really well, but I think a lot of his minutes were brought on by the fouls from players ahead of him. You have Isaiah Dasher. He's played between 16 and 18 minutes in each of the last 3 games. He just does nothing when he's on the floor, below 5% in all the major usage categories. Jalen Murray is a player that could see a little bit more time. He's somebody I have a lot of interest in at 3.3K. He's a little more expensive than Rupert and Dasher, but his usage rate is phenomenal. It just comes down to, is he going to be on the floor? He hasn't played more than 11 minutes in the last 2 games, but when he's out there, he's just throwing up shots. He has a 17% usage rate. With him, it comes down to, can he see the minutes? So sort of in that Mitch Lightfoot category, I'll take a stab on him in some of the larger field tournaments just to be a little different in terms of the build.
Yeah, I will caution, not that it can't be repeated, but, if you're just box score hunting and you see Rupert, he had 3 steals and 2 blocks, which is a crazy outlier for him. So that really pushed up. He did play well, and he did play 22 minutes, but that's a little red flag for me.
Yeah, I mean, he played 22 minutes because their best player, who played 33 minutes in the game prior, fouled out in 19.
Correct. And I mean, I think we could see Baycott is going to cause problems. So let's get right to it now. Every time they're on the slate, I say the same thing to you. His rebounding prop is at 14, but I don't even know if that's high enough. I mean, the guy is double, forget it. I mean, that's a given in this situation. Where do you have Baycott projected rebounds wise, and how often do you want to pay up upwards of 9,200 for him?
He's at 13.8. So that's probably a really good line. Tiny value towards the under, not even something I would consider taking, though. Baycott averages a double-double on the year, so you're basically locking in that bonus right away. North Carolina plays 5 guys, and that's it. Outside of ejections and foul trouble, Baycott's on the floor 35-plus minutes. He played 39 minutes in their second most recent game. He has a 17% shot rate and a 32.5% rebound rate. That's where you get all that double-double equity. He has massive size advantages here. We talked about how small St. Peter's is, how poor they are in rebounding. They do play solid defensively, but if North Carolina is throwing up bad shots, who is going to box out Baycott to get these rebounds? I think he's still one of the best plays on the slate, even at an elevated price. You just find a way to make him work, whether it's with Matthew Lee or one of these St. Peter's guys. I think making that construction a priority is still beneficial. And then all of the North Carolina starters, we can dig into them a little bit here, but they're all just great plays outside of maybe a Leaky Black.
Leaky Black. So I want to ask you, I will say this. One thing I think is really important to look at, and I had this question, we didn't know for sure, but you accurately said it's going to return to normal. I said, what about Dontrez Styles? Do you think after the Baylor game, he could get into the rotation? And sure enough, it was a totally different situation. He played 5 minutes against UCLA. So clearly Hubert Davis is saying, we're going with the guys we're always going to go with, and pending something outrageous, it's just going to be these 5 guys. The guy that we both were pretty interested in and buying low was Caleb Love. He had a crazy good shooting game. He took 13 threes. 6,500, I don't really understand. So his price came down, question mark. Does that make him, I mean, he's got to be playable, but how much exposure do you think you should have to someone like that?
He should be one of the most owned players if you're playing 150 or just spreading your lineups out, he should be one of the most owned players you have today. This is kind of a trend we've seen through the Elite Eight. Now, yesterday it was the same thing. They loosened pricing a little bit. The Sweet 16 was pretty tight, especially on the second day. And a lot of casuals are playing right now. And I mean, it's not good for business to tightly price all these players and you end up with 4 St. Peter's guys in your lineup in order to get Baycott. So I actually like what they did a little bit. With that said, Caleb Love's still way too cheap. I was a little surprised RJ Davis was more expensive than him on the last slate. We saw RJ Davis go nuts against Baylor. But over the course of the year, Caleb Love has significantly better rates. He plays slightly better minutes, and his usage is 3% higher, which is significant. And now you are saving $500 by coming down from RJ Davis to Caleb Love. If you're only playing one, I would prefer Caleb Love. However, the minutes are so tight here. You could play them both together. I think you want to play at least 2 North Carolina guys, if not 3 in this spot. It's just such a dream matchup against a bad St. Peter's team. You really can't go wrong playing any of these 5 starters. And we didn't talk about Manic. He's been so involved recently. The only game where his stats were depressed was in the game he got ejected, and he was on his way to a monster score in that game. Over 20% shot rate, 19% rebound rate. He's active in the periphery. Manic is doing it all right now. He's just on an absolute heater. And then Leaky Black, he's a peripheral player, and that's it. He has a 6% shot rate on the year, but he's played 39 and 40 minutes in 2 straight games. The assist rate's actually decent. So if you want to avoid like a Daryl Banks or someone on St. Peter's who has a cap ceiling, Leaky at least is on a team with a great team total. And if he assists on some of these baskets, maybe it gets you there. He's by far the 5th option in the offense, though.
And there is no 6th option, correct?
You have your play in
Johnson.
case of emergency guys, the Mitch Lightfoots of this team. Does Dontrell Styles play a decent amount if Caleb Love fouls out? Caleb Love did fall out of their second most recent game in 32 minutes, and that's another reason Dontrez played a decent amount. So I think Dontrez plays the Mitch Lightfoot role, the Juwan Roberts role. Just if something crazy happens, he's probably the main beneficiary.
I would agree, but it took a Manic ejection, and then Caleb Love fouled out, and then they were forced, and the game went to overtime. So there was a lot working in his favor there. I think that's drawing pretty thin. Clearly, North Carolina, a premier team on the slate. All right, we've done 2 up, 2 down. I will say, if you're hopping in, you're checking out this for the first time, enjoying what you see, you want to support us, easiest way, hit the like button. And if you want more content, just press subscribe. We want to know what you guys are doing, and we want you to join the upwards of 75,000 subscriber community that we have built here. It's because of you guys that we do these shows, and we enjoy them immensely. All right, final thoughts before we bounce on out of here. Lineup construction, anything, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think considering ways to get unique is going to be really important today. My favorite way in these large field tournaments is to get players like Mitch Lightfoot in there that nobody's going to play. They're not projected well, but they have a path, and that path is what happens to the players in front of them. Is it foul trouble? What could it possibly be? I think another place to do this is with St. Peter's, just because these players are so volatile. Even in like their 3rd most recent game, a guy in Jalen Murray played 19 minutes. If you play that guy at 3.3K and he plays 19 minutes, he is so active that he could be the decision point that gets you a tournament win, and accesses a different lineup construction than everyone else. So just consider some of those players, I think, in tournaments.
No doubt about it. 2 games up, 2 games down. We're going to bounce out of here. For me, for Matt, for everyone at OddsChecker and Awesemo, good luck. Enjoy the games. And of course, you will be seeing us for all things Final Four. Hit us up if you have any questions, and get in Discord. Thanks to PrizePicks on the way out. Enjoy the games, and we'll talk to you guys soon.